Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Ryan Wilmington. I'm the Policy and Communications Associate here at Illinois Green Alliance, and I'm excited for you all to be here for our webinar today, Code Campaigns, Creating a Health, Resilience, and Efficiency Baseline for Illinois. You've all been muted on entry, so please type any questions you have throughout the session into the Q&A and we'll get them answered at the end. And just as a FYI, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out in a follow-up email. And we're happy to say that today's program was put on through collaboration between Illinois Green Alliance, RMI, and AIA Chicago Committee on the Environment. First, a bit about Illinois Green. For those of you who do not know us, we are the green building community in Illinois, and we're leading the advancement of healthy, high-performance buildings for people across the state. And we've set a goal for every building in the state to reach net zero by 2050. And that is possible through the work of our passionate volunteers and members who are working to meet the needs of this community. And we are striving towards this goal by three key pillars. First being the education of building professionals. Second being working to advance green building policy and remove barriers to green building. And then third, we are working to support buildings on their journey to net zero, for instance, through the Building Energy Resource Hub. And before we get started on our content today, as a note, this webinar is approved for AIA 1 LU credit and can also be logged for 1 lead AP or Grain Associate CE hour. To request AIA CE credit or a personalized certificate of completion for architecture license reporting purposes, follow this QR code and complete the linked form. And we'll also be putting that form in the chat now and at the end of the session. As a reminder, this form can only be completed by live attendees, and we will not be sharing outside the session. So make sure you click on this link while you have the chance. And for those interested in self-reporting CE hours for lead credentials, we will be sharing self-reporting instructions and a fillable certificate of completion in our follow-up email next week. And we have 4 key learning objectives for this webinar. First being describing the role building energy codes play in supporting decarbonization efforts and energy efficiency efforts. Second being evaluating potential amendments that could strengthen Illinois' energy code and strengthen building efficiency and resilience standards. Third being identifying opportunities, timelines, and pathways for engaging in the energy code development process in the state. And fourth, finally, we will be analyzing strategies used by other states and national leaders to advance energy efficiency through building codes. And finally, before we jump into that, I want to take a moment to recognize Illinois Green sponsors who make our work possible. So a special thank you to our gold level sponsors, ComEd, USGBC, and Sloan. To learn how you can make a commitment to advancing green buildings across the state, you can visit illinoisgreenalliance.org/sponsorship to start a conversation about supporting our work today. So I'm very excited to jump into this webinar. And first, before we do that, I want to set the stage for why we need to take climate policy action. And as we think about the future and our policy needs, buildings are key because when we looked at the scope of the problem in our 2024 Getting to Zero Illinois report, we found that over 30% of Illinois' emissions, as well as 73% of our electricity use, are used by the building sector. And when you combine these two impacts, our scope 2 emissions, buildings are the highest emitter in the state. So there is no way we can hit our climate goals without addressing this. And while I wish that was enough to take action, there are other key reasons why pushing green buildings is important. First, being public health. We know that fossil fuel combustion in buildings is directly linked to over 21% of asthma cases in the state, as well as other serious illnesses like cancer. And we also know that efficiency saves money. A recent report found that over $1,000 a year is saved by the average American due to the investments we've already made into energy efficiency. That's upgrades as low as LED light bulbs to grid-wide investment. And with energy costs, particularly fossil fuels projected to rise, clean buildings is key to saving people even more. And we also know that there is a growing green workforce in Illinois, over 128,000 people strong. And that is more than double the workforce of the fossil fuels and includes plenty of the people who are joining us today. So we want to continue this growth and support this growing industry. And finally, we know that 90% of people's lives are spent in buildings, and that tells us first, we need to get outside more. And second, that we need to invest in built environments that are comfortable, safe, and healthy, because that's where people spend the majority of their time. So that brings us to our main event, and I'm really excited to introduce our speakers today who will go into this problem in more detail, as well as how building codes and advocacy on this front can address these problems. Our first speaker is Lauren Reeg, and she is a manager in RMI's Clean Buildings program, where she's responsible for the cross-cutting analytics and policy research that supports decarbonization of buildings in the Midwest region. She co-leads the effort to support the adoption of green policy in Illinois Energy Code alongside environmental advocates, building professionals, and others. Before joining RMI, Lauren earned her master's in environment and resources from UW-Madison with an emphasis on energy analysis and policy. And in conjunction, she interned for Renew WI, where she focused on regulatory analysis of clean energy in Wisconsin. And Erin Sherman is a senior associate focused on building energy codes, performance standards, and residential new construction certifications at RMI. She works with governments and advocates across the US to advance regulations that align buildings with the energy transition. And prior to joining RMI, Erin worked for 10 years on climate-related, human-centered design and behavioral science interventions. So I'm excited to turn it over, but first I want to remind everyone that after we hear from our speakers, we'll have an audience Q&A that I'll lead. And remember to add your questions to the Q&A function throughout the program so our speakers can address them at the end. And now I will pass it over to our speakers so they can dive in.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. I am going to share my slides once you bring yours down. Ryan, are you able to unshare your slides? I don't think I can.
I'm working on it.
Here. Okay, sorry, thank you.
This is never as easy as it looks.
There we go. All right. Is everyone able to see these now? Perfect. I'll take
Yep, looks good.
So we're good to go. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, IGA and AIA, for having us here today. We're really excited to talk about building code development in the state and why it's important for resiliency in our buildings, for the workforce, for the health and economics of Illinoisans, and all the fabulous things Ryan was saying earlier about buildings I feel like we're talking to the right group here about why building sustainable and efficient buildings is really important to the residents of the state. And so, as I said, my name is Lauren, joined here with Erin, and we're going to get into the opportunities and the technical details a little bit more. An introduction to RMI, where we work. RMI is an independent, nonpartisan nonprofit that transforms global energy systems through market-driven solutions to secure a clean, prosperous, zero carbon future for all. I work in the Midwest region. Erin works on building regulation, policy, and building codes. So we are the perfect combination of RMIers to be here today to talk about building codes in Illinois. Goals for the session are three pieces. One, we're going to overview the building code development process. And then we're going to deep dive on some of the green sustainability amendments that have been proposed in these processes. And then we're going to talk about how organizations or individuals can take action into supporting sustainable building codes. So we'll kind of start with how building codes drive sustainability, drive efficiency, and drive critical co-benefits in the state. So strong building codes make homes and buildings more affordable to operate, more comfortable to live in, more resilient to extreme weather events, and more climate aligned. I think we're talking to the right group here, and we don't need to get too deep into how this operates, but wanted to throw a couple facts at you all. As Ryan said earlier, about 30% of Illinois' carbon emissions and across the economy come from buildings, and that number is even higher for energy-related emissions. Emissions also have a strong tie to health. Emissions from buildings led to nearly 1,120 early deaths in Illinois in 2017 alone. And they drive comfort and resiliency. A robust energy code promotes comfort, safety, and extreme weather resilience. I threw a couple of articles up on the slides here just to kind of illustrate that this is a national problem, but it's also an Illinois problem. We can see the impacts of and the need for good buildings already showing up in Illinois through extreme heat weathers, uh, extreme cold, especially in the Midwest, and also through the resiliency and comfort that people want and the safety. So how does building codes kind of relate to all of this? Well, we have two opportunities to update Illinois' codes. So there's the base code. The base code is the statewide building code. All new construction and major renovations have to meet this code. And then there's the stretch code. The stretch code was passed in the Clean Energy and Jobs Act a few years ago. And effectively, this code is more efficient, more stringent than the state code that municipalities have the option of adopting as the local baseline. Additionally, state projects must follow this code. The key players in who makes the decision on what the new code looks like, and they update the code every 3 years, are three key decision makers. The Illinois Energy Code Advisory Council. They are the ones who generally are drafting the code, taking a lot of stakeholder input and getting a near final draft of it. Then they approve it and they send it to the Capital Development Board. This is a board of additional board of experts that review it, often take feedback, and then approve it. And then they send it to the third hurdle or vote for the Legislative Joint Committee on Administrative Rule. This is a legislative committee full of legislators that review it and approve it. So the code needs to go through all three of those processes and be voted on. And then other key influencers, these groups don't have decision-making power, but they do have strong influences. City councils and local code officials, along with general stakeholders like building professionals, environmental justice advocates. And so these are some of the critical influencers that we have found the decision makers really listen to, because these are the people who really know what they're doing and are the ones that are engaging with the code. So I wanted to talk through what's the process for adopting new building codes in Illinois. Again, they adopt codes every 3 years, both the base and now the stretch code. And here's how the process goes. So Stakeholders can propose code language. Every 3 years, they kind of start with the baseline of the newest IECC, International Energy Conservation Code. So right now we're on 2024. And then stakeholders can propose strengthening and weakening amendments. Uh, During this time, comments can be received both from the public to propose language, but also in support of proposals or against proposals. From there, the Energy Council will review the language and develop a draft code. Through this time, they're taking oral comments. And then it gets sent to the Capital Development Board, who receives the code to approve or amend. And then from there, after they vote on it to accept it, it goes to JCAR, that legislative committee, who takes written comments and often oral comments, although those are often in person. And once approved, it goes into effect. So where are we in that process? Well, I'll start at the top with the base code. So the base code has actually gone through the Energy Advisory Council and is on to the Capital Development Board. They vote on that this month, and then it'll get sent to JCAR. At the bottom, you can see the stretch code timeline. So we're actually right now in the language proposal section. So proposals have been submitted. They're accepting written comment in opposition or in support of certain proposals. And then in June to July, the council will be taking oral comment to develop the draft code. And then later in the summer, we expect it to go to Capital Development Board, JCAR, and then approved by the end of the year, ideally. So this is kind of the process for adopting codes. And now we wanted to get into what are the codes themselves, what is being proposed. And so I'll hand it over to Erin now to get into the technical details.
Thanks, Lauren. So I'll start with a summary of what's going on in the base code, move on to stretch code, talk about some of the specific provisions, and then kind of bring it all back together and summarize at the end before we talk about what you can do or how you can get involved if you'd like to. So starting with the base code, as Lauren mentioned, right now, these recommendations from the Advisory Council are wrapped up. The council has approved them, and they will be voted on by the Capital Development Board next Tuesday, so coming right up in less than a week. What are they voting on? On the residential side, they're voting on a mostly unchanged model code, the 2024 IECC. The 2024 is more flexible than the 2021. It is more efficient on an annual basis. There's a little bit of kind of horse trading that happened such that some attributes of the 2024 are not quite as strong as those same ones in the 2021. There are also a couple of amendments that are Illinois specific in here. One of them is that a kind of double counting loophole, the opaque walls provision, was taken out. And there is a credit now for gas heat pumps in the prescriptive path in the unusual circumstances that one of those is available and installed in a dwelling unit. On the commercial side, the 2024 base model code is in the recommendation, and there are a couple of important amendments to that. One is that there's a limited version of electric readiness, limited in that it mostly applies to pretty small systems, like residential sized systems. And that is because those large central plants are not necessarily difficult to electrify, but the best way to electrify them is pretty specific to the building circumstances. So having readiness measures is challenging for that. So there's a limited version of electric readiness in the commercial base code draft. There's also some what we call fuel debiasing. I'll talk more about what that is, but long story short, this helps level the playing field so that the code doesn't quite as preferentially treat buildings with mixed fuels. In other words, buildings that contain some combustion equipment compared to the base code. So moving on the stretch code side, again, as Lauren said, this is really at the beginning of the development process. And the stretch code process is on rails to an extent that the base code process really isn't, because the stretch code has to, by Illinois statute, meet certain site energy requirements. So those components of the stretch code How exactly the site energy goals will be met will be determined through this process, but they have to be met. They have to be met one way or another. However, the stretch code also, the spirit of it is for it to be more stringent than the base code, for it to be an opportunity for localities to exceed that base code in alignment with their policy goals. Illinois currently has a stretch code. It just became available to adopt a few months ago, and it has pretty strong provisions already. The residential is based on the 2021 IECC. It has electric readiness provisions and some partial debiasing. Commercial similarly has partial electric readiness and debiasing. For commercial, currently the stretch code only requires electric readiness for R2 occupancies, that is basically mid and high-rise apartment buildings. The amendments that are in play include rolling in any positive changes from the base code so that we don't have kind of a topsy-turvy situation where the base code is stronger in some respects than the stretch code. There are currently those electric readiness measures. We want to protect those and strengthen them if possible in the next version of the stretch code. We also want a stronger, more comprehensive approach to fuel debiasing. And finally, we would love to see an all-electric appendix. That appendix piece means that a jurisdiction could decide whether or not to adopt it as part of the stretch code. They could take it or leave it instead of it being an obligatory part of the stretch code. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to go through these three topical areas of amendments and explain them a little bit more, starting off with electric readiness. This is pretty straightforward. Electric readiness makes sure that if there is a piece of combustion equipment in a building, it can be replaced in the future with an electric piece of equipment for the same end use that won't require tearing open walls, adding new wiring. Essentially, you want to just make it ready for a drop-in replacement. And that could mean that you would be able to switch easily from a furnace to a heat pump, or a tank gas water heater to a heat pump water heater, etc. So that's the premise of electric readiness in general. And in the residential stretch code, pretty comprehensive electric readiness is already in the live version today, and we assume it will probably also be in the next live version. It is not in the version of the base code under consideration right now. And on the commercial side, what is rolled into the base code is that limited version. It applies mostly to smaller or residential sized equipment. And there are some requirements there that are about ensuring there's capacity for wiring and space for wiring, again, so you don't have to tear open the walls to do a replacement, but not necessarily the literal wires. So just in case something goes differently than planned, to protect, the developer from higher costs, the wires themselves aren't required, just conduit or raceway. Next slide, please. All right, so on to the second topic, fuel debiasing. Sometimes we also call this a level playing field amendment. So to explain some context for why this is even a topic we're discussing, model codes are implicitly biased against buildings that use electric heat pumps. And code experts over time, RMI included, but also through kind of previous attempts and takes at this through the model code development process, through Illinois stretch code and other states' code processes, there have been different approaches to level the playing field in this respect. And the current stretch code does have a lot of good level playing field dimensions, but there are also some respects in which it remains biased or isn't comprehensive in how it levels the playing field. I'm going to talk through this a little bit more, what exactly this means, with a metaphor, if you'll indulge me for a second. So you all comply with codes in many cases in your professional lives, but just to set us all on the same place talking about this, you can think of a code as being like a race that a building has to run in order to comply. In that sense, they have start lines or standard reference designs or implicit baselines that credits, for example, are compared to, and they have end lines. That's the conservation objective to the code. you generally, to comply with a code, have to prove that you're at least some percent better, some number of credits better than the baseline to comply. So that sets the start line and the end line. Electric buildings have a more efficient start line. They start ahead because they're more efficient. And this is kind of an inherent quality of electric technology, even resistance, but it's to an even larger extent for heat pumps because heat pumps don't just use energy, they kind of take it from the environment and repurpose it, right? So in Illinois, heat pumps are quite a bit more efficient even than Energy Star combustion equipment. So the Energy Star definition of a particularly efficient gas furnace in the northern region where Illinois is a 0.95 AFUE furnace. And heat pumps in general, kind of a typical heat pump, will have a 2.7 coefficient of performance or COP in Illinois climates. So that's quite a multiplier. Heat pump buildings definitely start ahead. They're definitely more efficient from the get. You would think that that might mean that the code would actually favor heat pumps because you're already closer to the end line. But that's not how codes are structured. That's not what codes actually do. Instead, um, you essentially have a further away uh, objective to get to if you have that stronger start line, that more efficient start line. Codes don't give heat pumps credit for how much more efficient they are. They don't allow builders to take credit for that efficiency when they choose to install heat pumps. Therefore, buildings with combustion appliances can comply when they're less efficient, and buildings with heat pumps need to be more efficient to comply. I think we've got a couple more little slides. You can see heat pump building is sad and confused. Why is it like this? We don't really have to get into why it's like this, but we do know how to fix it, right? There are specific structural changes you can make to the code that don't really change how you comply with it, like the paperwork. They just change some of the numbers in it to make it fair. So there are 4 things that we do to do that. First of all, you set the same baseline for everyone, the same start line. And in the case of RMI's zero fuel bias code, which is what we've proposed for the stretch code this go round, buildings are measured against a minimum federal efficiency gas equipment baseline. So that way heat pumps get rewarded for being more efficient, and gas buildings are, performing against the same baseline they've always been performing against. The second piece is that efficiency is measured based on energy used in the building. This sounds a little bit perplexing. You might ask, if you're not working with the code all the time, isn't efficiency already measured based on energy used in the building? But it's not necessarily. Often the code uses energy cost as the default metric. There are plenty of issues with cost as a default metric. Among other things, you don't actually know what rates will be paid by a future occupant, especially in environments where suppliers can be chosen and they're not, a single default supplier. In any case, we use site energy instead of energy cost or other metrics. Third, electric heat pumps get due credit at last for how much less energy they use than combustion equipment. So, if you're running faster, you get credit for running faster. Kind of that simple. And finally, buildings have to reach the same finish line, the same efficiency goal, no matter what types of energy they use. So that's how you restructure the code to fix it, to level the playing field. Here's what this looks like in the code, getting a layer wonkier here. I'm going to read this slide from the bottom up. So that foundational piece is using site energy as a metric. That is used across all the pathways in the code, whether residential or commercial. That just helps make sure we're measuring the right thing and not adding error into the mix, etc. The next foundational piece is those equal baselines and efficiency goals. And then that principle gets inflected differently because different compliance pathways kind of operationalize those ideas differently. The prescriptive pathways in both the residential and commercial code as of 2024 IECC have a credit section. So that's C406 for commercial and mid and high-rise multifamily, R408 for the prescriptive path in the residential code. You have to earn a certain number of credits. So there is now an implicit baseline in those pathways that's based on a natural gas minimum efficiency building, right? And then all of the credits are calculated with respect to that implicit baseline. And there's a credit in there for the first time for a minimum efficiency heat pump piece of equipment for space and water heating. Previously, even though there were credits in there, they weren't for minimum efficiency equipment because, you know, that would have been the baseline for equipment metrics. But if you're comparing to an actual even baseline level playing field, you should be giving credit to a more efficient type of equipment. Same idea in the performance pathway. There's a single baseline, single performance target, and just the way the math works in the performance pathway, you will get credit for higher efficiency. Next slide. All right. This is not untrodden ground. So as we've mentioned before, Illinois first version of the stretch code already includes several debiasing methods. First of all, it uses model code language. That's part of the 2024 IECC. It's in an appendix to the 2024 IECC that sets a 1.25 times multiplier on buildings' credit requirements if those buildings don't use heat pumps as their primary heating source. It's a nuanced piece of language. It's not long, but essentially, if you have cooling in a space and your heating load is higher, as it might be in a lot of Illinois buildings, depending on building size, etc., you need to ensure that at least your cooling load is reversible through a heat pump instead of a one-way air conditioner and is configured as primary heat. That way you don't have to multiply your credit requirements by that 1.25. If you're all fossil heat all the time, or if you have heat pump heating under your cooling load, then you have to get more credits. That 1.25 multiplier, without getting way into the math, is not enough to actually fully debias the code for commercial buildings. It's probably a quarter or fifth as large as it would need to be to fully debias that. There are also more credits available for heat pump measures in residential, and there's a more stringent pathway for fossil fuel buildings in the residential code as well. Also, site energy is the metric used where a metric is specified in Illinois Stretch V1. So there's a lot of good things going already in the stretch code. Colorado is currently on its second public review draft of its updated statewide floor code, and it's looking like that will have lots of these very similar debiasing features as well. And California and Washington have kind of preceded a generalized wave toward this in the country. They have very kind of customized versions of this code that now other jurisdictions are trying to pursue in a little bit more of a standardized way. Next slide. Okay, so that brought us through the first two types of amendments that we're discussing to advance the decarbonization qualities of the codes in Illinois, electric readiness, debiasing or level playing field. The last one is the all-electric appendix, which RMI has proposed for the stretch code. Appendices are optional for jurisdictions to adopt. They are only effective and mandatory for developers and builders if a jurisdiction explicitly adopts them. So if we're adopting an appendix into the stretch code, that basically says to a jurisdiction, if you want to adopt the stretch code, you can pick. Do you want it to be an all-electric stretch code or just a much more efficient stretch code that has some encouragements to do other decarbonization things? So the all-electric appendix is from the model code development process. It's published with the IECC, and it just requires new buildings to be all electric. This is not uncharted ground either. So New York State and New York City both have some version of this. They adopted it separately at different times. Washington, D.C. also has this, as do several communities in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is also, excuse me, trying new and innovative things like having building decarbonization zoning practices. So totally different range of law and rule there. But a lot of jurisdictions have dipped a toe into the all-electric space. We think this should be an option for jurisdictions in Illinois, whether or not they're kind of grandfathered into a home rule situation like some jurisdictions are. Next slide. All right, so to sum up, and after this I will hand it over to Lauren to talk about what you can do, how you can get involved. For the base code, that draft is headed to the Capital Development Board next Tuesday for their vote. You can join that meeting and speak your mind about it if you would like. The residential code is more or less that model code, just a couple of small tweaks. And the commercial code is the model code plus a couple of kind of middle of the road, manageable, extensively discussed among the advisory council pro decarbonization measures that would make it a little bit less uneven in the code than the base code between having combustion equipment and electric equipment in buildings. And on the stretch code, it's still wide open. This process has just started. The very first meeting for it happened this Tuesday. The very first meeting for the commercial stretch code will happen next Tuesday. And the provisions that are under discussion there include energy efficiency boosts to meet those CEJA mandated energy indexes, as well as electric readiness, fuel debiasing or level playing field, and those all electric appendices. So if you want to get involved in advocating for any of those things, I think we'll have a little poll later on where we will ask if you're interested in getting involved there. But hopefully not stealing Lauren's thunder too much. Pass it over to her.
Thanks, Erin. Appreciate it. I appreciate your thoughtful description of all of those amendments. I always learn something new when you speak. And if anyone has any questions about the technical pieces, please go ahead and put in the Q&A and we will happily get to it after the presentation. But before that, we're going to talk about how people or organizations can support the building code adoption process. So there's a couple of ways. We'll start with the base code. So this week and next week, you can share your support with members of the Capital Development Board through direct conversations with them, or join that call on Tuesday. Part of the survey that Erin had just flagged that will be coming out soon allows you to indicate whether you would like us to send you information on meetings. When you can share your opinions or your thoughts. And so we are happy to do that. And then in June to August, share your support with members of JCAR, which is that Legislative Joint Committee, through written comments and direct conversations with them. And then the stretch code, which is a little bit earlier in the process, by May 31st, so the end of this month, you can submit supporting comments to the Energy Advisory Council in support of the base code in general, but any strengthening amendments that that align with your organization or your priorities. And then on Tuesdays from now till July, the Energy Advisory Council will be accepting oral comment during the Energy Advisory Council meetings. So you can go and speak virtually on what you would, the proposals that you support. Again, that's something that if your organization is interested in getting invitations to these, or like just having Zoom, they're open call, but if you want the Zoom link put on your calendar, because sometimes that's just easier to have on your calendar, we are more than happy to help you with that. And then in late summer, share your support with members of the Capital Development Board and JCAR. So once the stretch code gets to where the base code is now, well, it'll be the same asks. To make things a little bit easier for people, we have developed talking points for those oral comment sessions or any conversations you're having with decision makers. and also draft comments to submit to the Advisory Council, the Capital Development Board, or the JCAR Board as well. And then also, yes, we will share meeting invites to oral engagements when scheduled. If I could say it like at a really high level, what are one or two things that would be really helpful for you all to do if you're interested in engaging? I would start with the lowest lift, which is submitting comments, written comments to the Illinois Energy Advisory Council by May 31st. In the follow-up email, we'll have a link to how you can do that, and we'll also have draft comments for you to do. And then the second most impactful thing would be to join conversation or join the oral comment periods for the Illinois Advisory Council meetings, the Capital Development meetings, and the JCAR meetings. And then if you are interested in engaging even deeper, then we would encourage you to have conversations with specific board members or legislative members who are interested and value your opinion. So those are kind of the top options and where we see the most value and input from you all, especially as experts in this space. So this is the end of our presentation. We can get into Q&A now, but wanted to thank you all for your attention today, listening to building codes. Erin and I personally find building codes really interesting, and I suspect the people in this crowd do too, but they can get pretty tedious. So we're happy to answer any questions. And if you have follow-up questions after, please feel free to email us. We're happy to chat. But with that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand it back to Ryan to start the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Lauren and Erin, for your fantastic presentation. So we have a few comments already in, but just want to remind everyone again, if you want to ask any more questions, please submit them as soon as you can. But first, I'll start. Joy asked if this session is being recorded and may we have access to the slides. The session is being recorded. Lauren and Erin, are you able to provide those? All right, great.
Yes, we'll send them to you so they can go out in the follow-up email.
Fantastic. Next question. Do the base code or the stretch code have requirements for actual energy consumption performance in the operational stage?
I can try to answer this one, and I don't know if we're able to take Shubhra off mute, so you might be able to clarify this a little bit, but I'll take an initial swing at it to begin with. So because code for new construction kind of ends its enforcement process when the certificate of occupancy is granted, it can't then also have enforcement requirements that happen once the building is occupied. So it has requirements that are related to performance, that are intended to encourage efficient performance, but it doesn't actually entail monitoring benchmarking. That is not part of the code.
Shubhra, if you have any follow-ups on that, please put that. Oh, all right, great. So we meant reporting requirements after occupancy, and your response answers that. Fantastic, thank you. And she also asked what these codes say about renewables.
Yeah, so this is an area where the base and stretch codes are quite different. So the base code, both the 2021 and the 2024, do address renewables. It's different for residential and commercial. I'll focus on the 2024 since it's the one we're talking about for the most part here. So in both the commercial and residential 2024 IECC, you can earn credit toward compliance by installing on-site renewables, or in some circumstances, those are required. So for some commercial buildings, depending on details of orientation and shading and things like that, a limited amount of on-site renewables are actually required. And then you can earn credit or comply as an alternative if you meet one of those exceptions, additionally through further renewables beyond that requirement. The off-site renewables that are allowed are pretty diverse. They include things from a power purchase agreement that's, very specific and has a contractual term that matches the code and it's kind of that like one-to-one relationship, all the way to a green retail tariff. And I don't know how many, I guess, like Rex heads there are in the audience, how familiar you are with how those tariffs can work. But they're not necessarily a great way to encourage renewables on the grid overall. They're not necessarily additional, they're not time matched, etc. So, one of the things that is different about the stretch code compared to the base code is that there are these efficiency goals in statute that have to be met by the stretch code. Those are site energy indexes. They're compared to the 2006 energy codes. And those indices specifically can't be met with renewables. So they have to be met with the energy use of the building itself. So there are amendments in especially the commercial code because it kind of values those renewables a little bit more heavily that mean you can't replace efficiency with renewables. There's still encouragements for renewables in the code. They just can't replace or override requirements for efficiency. Hope that answered the question.
Thank you very much, Erin. Then we have a question from Ripal. Apologies if I did not pronounce that correctly, that I can answer. Do you know how many municipalities have adopted the current stretch code? So far, Evanston earlier this February became the first city in Illinois to adopt the stretch code. Currently, the stretch code has only been available for adoption since January, and we are working on campaigns to educate the building professionals, city officials, and policymakers across different municipalities about this opportunity. I would say there's about give or take a dozen that are interested in taking this step as well initially. Jenny has a follow-up with that. Oak Park has made a step towards adopting the stretch code, but they have not confirmed it yet. They are close to doing so and becoming the second. Then Shubra asked if we could link to drafts of these codes. I'll be happy to add them in the follow-up email as well.
I'll also drop a link to the Stretch Energy Code proposals webpage in the chat. There it is. So that has the like starter drafts of the stretch codes that are currently under development, as well as the proposals that have been submitted so far. So you can see kind of what the default is and then what else is being considered.
Schubert also asks, what do you think the most challenging requirements to meet will be for most design professionals?
So, in the base codes, I think that the requirements are pretty market aligned. I don't think there's anything too tough in there. In the stretch code, uh, the efficiency requirements, those site energy index requirements in CEJA by statute, on the residential side are pretty stringent. So if you do residential work, including low-rise apartment buildings or assisted living and things of that nature, those could at times require you to push efficiency more than code has required in the past. It is not, you know, at or that close yet, or certainly exceeding something like Passive House. It might be starting to get close this cycle to a zero energy ready home type of efficiency level. So it's in no way infeasible, but it is efficient. So it will push to get there. However, because of the structure of 2024, it really leans heavily, even in the prescriptive path, on that credit table. So there's a lot of optionality. There's a lot of choice that you can anticipate in the upcoming base and stretch code.
Uh, Shubra, please let us know if that answered your question there. And then seeing as there's no more open questions, I will make a last call while we revisit one that Erin answered in the chat, just to make sure everyone has seen this. Jenny asked, won't the 2024 IECC incorporate the stretch code so that once the 2024 base code is adopted, the stretch code will go away? And Erin, you gave an answer to that in the chat if you want to share with everyone.
Yeah, so Illinois statute lays out separate site energy requirements that have to be met by the stretch code for a few cycles. I want to say 3 or 4 cycles at least. So there's no like statutory requirement that they merge. It seems like there's going to continue to be separate codes for the foreseeable future. I will say that for the 2024 commercial code, as folks might know, if you're following along with the stretch development process before, the 2024 was the base of the currently effective commercial stretch code. And because the site energy indices on the commercial side are not as stringent compared to the model codes for commercial, it may be that there aren't a ton of efficiency increases in the next version of the stretch code above the base code. In other words, if a jurisdiction adopts the stretch codes on the commercial side after this update, that might not make a very big difference for commercial, but it will make a difference, right? Because of that requirement that the performance is based on the energy use in the building, not net energy use. So renewables can't kind of cancel out energy used in the building. And the stretch code also already has some of those level playing field features, and it will probably retain the ones it has and might add more. It already has some electric readiness, it might add some more. It may or may not exceed base code depending on what happens over the next few weeks. So they will continue to be different over time. Seeing another couple of questions from Shubra. Are there dollar amounts or studies about additional costs from stretch code compliance from any feasibility studies? So from the first stretch code development process that resulted in the code released in January, there's a residential study from PNNL on cost effectiveness, and that is linked on, I will find it and I will drop it in the chat. Linked on CDP's website. So if you scroll down to the Illinois cost effectiveness analysis, you will see that there. Whoops, I just realized I'm only sending that to host and panelists, so that's not helpful. Let me fix that. There's that cost effectiveness study for you. So you can see there how that looks for the currently available stretch code. In terms of the commercial stretch, again, it's quite similar to the base commercial 2024 right now. And for the next editions. We don't know exactly what the provisions will be yet, so too soon to say. But that will probably be available later on in the process, either late this year or sometime next year.
But thanks, Erin. And I just want to add some highlights of that study for people who don't want to scroll through that entire research document. So some of the findings were that the stretch code would lead to almost $250 in annual utility savings with ROI of around 10 to 11 years for the average home and life cycle cost savings of almost $9,000.
Great. And then I see a question, has anyone come up with a comparative analysis of base versus stretch versus FIAS? I think no. I think that that has not been done. I will say that it is an alternative compliance path in both the base and the stretch codes to get FIAS certified. FIAS certification as a code compliance path has an interesting history, especially in Massachusetts, where it's kind of like the main road most folks are on in new construction in Massachusetts. And it can be tough because if you're testing out of FIAS and you don't hit your test, you got to get your certificate of occupancy somehow. So they're navigating that actively in Massachusetts right now. In any case, to your original question, I don't think that that study exists yet. If that's something that would help you in your practice, it would be a great question to direct to the Capital Development Board.
And I do want to add, for compliance purposes, the Building Energy Hub does have a stretch code guide that goes over the differences between the base and stretch code for both the residential and the commercial codes. So I did add that in the chat. Unfortunately, it doesn't have FIAS included. It if there is no other questions, I want to remind everyone that I will drop the SurveyMonkey link in the chat for AIA reporting. So make sure if you haven't already received that to click that link and fill out that form within 10 days to receive credit for joining us today. But I'd also like to thank Erin and Lauren for sharing this presentation and teaching us how to get involved in these campaigns. So we will follow up with everyone, both with a follow-up email about the event, as well as with everyone who shared if they were interested in this type of advocacy. So thank you, Lauren and Erin, again, and thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thank you all.
All right, take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye now.